It is Sunday, the 8th of January, 2017. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church in Montreal, and we're just starting up our alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy, both those that take place locally here at the Unitarian Church of Montreal, but also in the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community. And we're looking at the banner on the Unitarian Church of Montreal announcing its 175th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. I think if you subtract 1842 from 2017, you get 175. And I'm noticing it's kind of cracked and disheveled and really not looking too good right now. So it's only been up for a short while. I don't think it was up before the new year. If it was, only shortly before the turn of the year. But I'm pretty sure it's, first time I really noticed it was last Sunday, which was January 1st. And it wasn't properly strapped down. It was sort of flapping in the wind. And maybe that flapping in the wind caused some kind of protective surface to get all cracked and everything. But it's kind of like a interesting statement about the less than perfect record of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. There's no doubt that in these 175th anniversary celebrations, they're going to be talking about all the good things that the Unitarian Church of Montreal has done over the last 175 years. I doubt very much that they're going to bring up any negative aspects of Unitarian Church of Montreal history, with the possible exception of the fact that in May of 1987, the original, well, not the original, but the main long-standing Unitarian Church of Montreal building, which was on Simpson Street, just above Sherbrooke Street, was burned down by the church's transsexual organist Wilhelmina Tibersma, and that burning down of the church resulted in the death of 2 Montreal firemen who were killed when an outer wall collapsed on them. I believe they were on the ladder of a fire truck fighting the fire when an outer wall collapsed and not only threw them to the ground, but buried them under rubble. But it only recently came to my attention that 3 other firemen were injured, and that 2 of them suffered spinal injuries after jumping off the roof of the church, presumably to escape flames, or it might have had something to do with the collapse of the wall, or a bit of both. That's the first I actually heard about that. So in addition to 2 firemen being killed, it seems that 2 out of 3 probably suffered quite serious spinal injuries as well, jumping off the roof, because it wasn't a small church. They might have jumped 30 or 40 feet, possibly, or possibly even higher. The Unitarian Church of Montreal building is probably somewhere like 25 feet high up to the roof there. Possibly as much as 30 if you measure it from the ground up, but not much higher. But the Unitarian Church of Montreal building on Simpson Street was considerably larger and higher. So as I said, this is the first I read about firemen being injured. It just came to my attention. I was looking into stuff on the internet. I think what it is I occasionally receive visits to the Emerson Avenger blog for people running searches on Wilhelmina Timmersma or Unitarian Church of Montreal fire. I sometimes follow those searches back from my web stats software. So I think that's what happened. And there was this new result of, I believe, an Associated Press or maybe Canadian Press article written soon after the fire that wasn't previously available on the internet. Some of the news services are putting their old archives out on the internet, and I think that's what it was. And so this was a story that I hadn't read before. A proper, professional journalistic and news report speaking about how 2 Montreal firefighters suffered spinal injuries jumping off the roof of the church, in addition to the 2 that were killed when the wall collapsed on them. So that's probably the only negative aspect of the history of the Unitarian Church of Montreal that will be mentioned during their 175th anniversary observances. Knowing what I know about the Unitarian Church of Montreal, they will probably studiously avoid mentioning the fact that I complained about anti-religious intolerance and bigotry on the part of Reverend Ray Drennan and some other leading members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, most notably Frank Green, president of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and also to some extent Val Bourdon, another former president of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And the response of the church was to pretty well dismiss my complaint and, to make a long story short, expel me from the church for complaining about Reverend Ray Drennan's anti-religious intolerance and bigotry, and also the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry of Frank Green, and ultimately beginning this outdoor peaceful public protest before I was actually fully expelled from the church. They initially temporarily expelled me for 6 months for doing nothing more than submitting a letter of grievance that, if it had been acted upon properly, would have brought an end to the conflict. But instead, they decided the best thing to do was to suspend my membership for 6 months. I did not protest during that 6-month suspension. I just said, well, we'll take the 6-month suspension and we'll come back and we'll say, hey, guess what? You still have a problem you haven't resolved, which is exactly what I did. I basically took a 6-month vacation from attending the Unitarian Church of Montreal. This would have been in, I think, 1997 and into the early part of 1998. After the 6-month suspension was over, I came back and resumed, being a member of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, but said, hey, you haven't resolved anything here by expelling me for 6 months. We still have exactly the same problem that existed before I was expelled for 6 months, and I still expect you to deal with it. And of course, they did nothing. So in May of 1998, I began protesting outside the church with picket signs, expecting that protest to end within a matter of weeks, or at most within a matter of a few months. I really did not think that the membership and leadership of the Unitarian Church of Montreal would just totally ignore a protest against the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry that I'd experienced at the hands of Reverend Ray Drennan and Frank Green and some other leading members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, which had been tolerated and possibly even approved of by pretty much everyone else who was a member of the church. But I was surprised by the fact that they basically just rather foolishly suspended my membership again. In fact, one of the reasons why I began my protest was because when they suspended my membership for 6 months, what they said in the suspension letter, and which was a bylaw that had been newly created by the Unitarian Church of Montreal, was that there was a 6-month suspension for any first offense, as it were, but that if there was a second offense, as it were, that there would be a general meeting of the congregation held towards the end of revoking the membership of the person who, you know, had supposedly offended the church. And I, being a big believer in democracy and also a big believer in my ability to persuade Montreal Unitarians that actually they were making a big mistake, I actually wanted, if it came to it, the Unitarian Church of Montreal to do exactly that, to make up some bogus complaint about, you know, my protest being illegitimate or whatever, and holding an annual special congregational meeting. That's the word I'm looking for, because that's the exact terminology. A special congregational meeting, which would have required a 2/3 vote of whoever attended, and there had to be, you know, a certain minimum attendance, you know, to reach quorum. So a significant portion of the full membership of the church had to be at this meeting, and a 2/3 vote in favor of expelling the person had to be achieved. And I thought, hey, you know, I think I have pretty good chance here of making it clear to the church in that meeting that, you know, A, they shouldn't kick me out of church permanently, and B, they should deal responsibly with my complaint against Reverend Ray Drennan, etc. And I think I was right, because what happened is, instead of following their own bylaw, they just suspended my membership again for a period of 1 year. So this was completely out of alignment with their own bylaw. Their bylaw said nothing about some interim measure of expelling a person again temporarily before holding that special congregational meeting, which I actually wanted to have held so that I could make my case against Reverend Ray Drennan and the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry that I had encountered, and A, not be kicked out of church, and B, finally have some real justice and equity and compassion exercised by the members and leadership of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, instead of willful ignorance and callous indifference and threats of punishment for complaining about serious intolerance and bigotry. So they suspended my membership for a year, which is fine by me. I just kept protesting. And then they suspended my membership for another 6 months. So for a total of 18 months, they did these temporary suspensions in order to stave off, delay holding the annual congregational meeting. And I think the reason that they did that was because they knew, you know, if they'd held the meeting when I first began protesting, or even some months into my protest, that they might not get the votes required. So essentially what they did is they spent 18 months, you know, the leaders who wanted to get rid of me, they spent 18 months lobbying everyone else in the church to, looks like I might be getting the look of death again from the Horan girl. Can't remember her first name off the top of my head. So in any case, looks like the door, oh, there she goes, she's going. I thought the doors might be locked. That does happen sometimes. So anyway, getting back to what I was saying, you know, I think the church leadership knew very well, and probably as a result of talking to people, you know, sounding them out, that if they held a special congregational meeting to permanently expel me from the church in the early stages of my peaceful public protest outside the church, that they had absolutely no guarantee that they would get the necessary 2/3 vote. So they essentially handed out 18 months worth of temporary suspensions, which were completely not at all in the bylaw. They totally disregarded the own bylaw that they had created in the first place, or at least lifted from another Unitarian church. But specifically, that bylaw did not exist prior to my complaints against Reverend Ray Drennan. This bylaw was either created or adapted from a previously existing bylaw of another Unitarian church, so-called disruptive behavior policy, in an effort to essentially silence me, to prevent me from complaining about the mistreatment and, quite frankly, verbally and psychologically abusive and intolerant and bigoted conduct of Reverend Ray Drennan and other leading members of the church. So, after lobbying everyone for 18 months, and then what they did is they held 2 so-called informational meetings, in which they had meetings prior to the special congregational meeting, supposedly providing information to church members before the meeting. Essentially those meetings, which I was not allowed to participate in, because I could have participated and given my side of the story, and if that had happened, if they had invited me to the 2 so-called informational meetings prior to the special congregational meeting, I probably could have persuaded the people who attended those meetings that it was a really silly idea. Oh, look, there's the thing flapping in the wind again. It's kind of very symbolic, I think, of the wind that comes out of this church, as it were. So getting back to things, if I'd been allowed to participate in one or both of those informational meetings, I probably could have very rationally made it clear to the church membership who attended those meetings that, kicking me out of the church for protesting